Okay, we're gonna continue on. I've done now the top 9 teams, except for my number one team. It was Leyland. So we will go there, and then we'll just do the bottom half of the league at some point. Um, most of those teams, like Lauren's still making moves. Charlie has to fix basically her entire bench and defensive players. So we're waiting kind of to see what else they got in store, if they're going to do anything before the season. I think Lauren might be done, though. But so maybe we'll do her after Andre. Okay. So let's start with Leyland. So number 9 overall. Hello and welcome your old friend Kyren Williams from the Rams for $60. So Kyren was a breakout star for the Rams last year. After being the backup to Cam Akers, he overtook the starting job in the first week of the season, and then boom, he became the guy. He was the number 6 fantasy running back last year, and that was despite missing 4 games in the middle of the season. So, yeah, he is going into his 3rd year now. He's the undisputed number 1 running back. He was averaging 22 touches per game when he played in the 12 games that he played, which is crazy workload. That's Christian McCaffrey-esque workload. He was even better towards the end of the season. Basically, once he came back in week 12, so week 12 through week 17, he averaged 24 fantasy points and really picked it up as Leyland made her playoff push. So he broke his hand in the wild card game against Detroit, but he's fine now going into training camp. They did draft Blake Corum out of Michigan, so the Michigan guys, Brian and Justin and Mackenzie, know him well. So Leyland did not get his handcuff, so she's hoping for a whole healthy season from Kyren Williams. But, Kyren was excellent. Kyren was very good. I don't think he'll have as good a season as he just had. I mean, he was incredible when he was healthy. But having Corum there hopefully will take some of the load off him. So instead of 22 touches a game, maybe he gets like 17. I'm thinking he'll still get 1,100 yards. I'm thinking he'll still get like 300 yards receiving. I think he'll still get like double digit, like 12 or 13 touchdowns. It'll just be a matter of, can he stay healthy the whole season? Because if he can stay healthy the whole season, then, yeah, he's incredible. He's basically, like, I want to say, like, McCaffrey light, almost. He's a great player. Well, he's a very good player in a great situation. Sean McVay, the same way Kyle Shanahan knows how to use running backs with Christian McCaffrey, Sean McVay knows how to use running backs like Todd Gurley. So I don't know if Kyren Williams has that kind of talent, that McCaffrey, Todd Gurley kind of talent, but he's a very special player. Really good pass catcher, hopefully with Matthew Stafford healthy again. He'll get more of the receiving workload. And again, I think Corum will eat into some of his touches, so he won't get quite as many. I think last year he got like 250 touches total. I don't know if he's going to get quite that much, maybe like 230, 225. But that's okay, as long as he can stay healthy. That's really the question. That's why probably he fell for only $60 and he's not going on the high end, because we don't know if he can stay healthy. Never seen it before. It's only going into his 3rd season. But he's in the prime of his career. He's on a very good offensive team. He's with one of the best offensive minds in football. So a lot of things going Kyren Williams' way. So we kind of all expected that Leyland would go this way, so it kind of is a no surprise pick. But still, it's a good pick. Solid all around. I just, again, wish you had his handcuff just to kind of protect yourself. 28 overall, $40, Michael Pittman Jr. So people might know that I'm not really very much of a fan of Michael Pittman Jr. I mean, his father won a Super Bowl with the Bucs at running back, had a good career with the Cardinals as well. He's a physical Michael Pittman Jr., so the son, the receiver. He's physical. He's more of a possession type of receiver. He's kind of like, he reminds me a little bit of Anquan Bolden. he was like, what was it, ninth in targets last year, and he was fifth in receptions. He had 109 receptions last year. So he relies more on volume than a lot of these other high-level receivers. Like, to give an example of that, he had how many yards? So he had 109 receptions last year, right? He had 1,152 receiving yards. Mike Evans had 1,255 on 79 receptions, all right? So Michael Pittman Jr. had less yards and 30 more receptions. I mean, that's kind of good in half PPR, the receptions we like, but that just gives you a general idea of just like, his efficiency's not great. He was still only the 15th best fantasy receiver in football last year. So he also doesn't really score very many touchdowns. He only scored 4. For whatever reason, despite he doesn't have a lot of speed, and he has a hard time just creating separation. He's like the opposite of Deontay Johnson. So he's a very solid wide receiver too, but for the money, I would rather have quite a few wide receivers on the board. Mike Evans, Devontae Adams, let's see, DK Metcalf went for around this much. You could have gotten, I think, Chris Olave, Devontae Smith, Drake London went for 40 as well. So I'm not exactly high on him. I kind of feel the same way about Michael Pittman Jr. as I feel about Nico Collins, where I'm just like, they're safe players in good offenses, but you're kind of paying for what they are exactly right now. There's no upside. They're going to get better. This is kind of their peak. Like, even though they're in the prime of their career, I can't, like, well, what are they going to do? Someone's going to throw the ball to Michael Pittman more than 109 times? Like, it's a lot. Unless you're having, like, a Michael Thomas 142 reception season, like, you're not going to expect him to get more than this. So I think regression is in store. I think we're only going to have, like, maybe ballpark around 100 receptions instead of 109. I think maybe we're going to have around 1,100 yards out of 1,152. I think maybe he gets a couple more touchdowns, so maybe 5 or 6. But that's not great. Like, and that's all dependent on if Anthony Richardson is healthy. So, yeah, I don't love this. Pittman's a safe player, but he's in a good offense. But there's not really, he's not going to get better. He just is what he is, and you paid for him. You didn't even get a discount on him. I mean, hell, what is it? I just talked about in Robbie's video about Amari Cooper going for $10. Amari Cooper had a better season than him, and he went for $10. $30 less. Amari Cooper went for $30 less. And I think they'll have incredibly similar seasons, except Pittman will just simply get more receptions, but they'll probably be around the same in yards because Cooper actually gets downfield and scores touchdowns. Pittman just doesn't score enough, and he doesn't get downfield. He's just a middle. He runs the middle of the field. He's a very good possession receiver, but he really needs someone across from him who can blow the top off the ceiling to kind of get him those open windows. So maybe that'll be a Donnie Mitchell. I don't know. But I'm not really a fan of paying $40 for Michael Pittman. It's very, very rich for me. Next, we had Travis Kelce at 33 overall for $24. So I know the Taylor Swift fan in you went for him. At first blush during the draft, I was like, oh, that's a really good deal for Travis Kelce, $24. But upon reflection, actually, I think you overpaid for him, but it kind of works out with your next pick. Anyway, Travis Kelce has been like the best fantasy tight end for 8 years, basically 8 years going. But he's starting, last year there were starting to be a little bit more signs of maybe a little bit of a drop-off. So he's got more competition for targets now. The Chiefs got better wide receivers. I mean, again, I mentioned it before, Kadarius Toney is gone. Marquez Valdes-Scantling is gone. Our Hollywood Brown is here. We've drafted Xavier Worthy. Rashee Rice is already there. It's a pretty good top three. So I don't think Kelce is going to have an amazing, incredible season like he did last year. I think he'll have less catches. He'll probably have around 83. He'll probably have around 850 yards and maybe 7 touchdowns. I think you slightly overpaid for him considering the prices of other tight ends, funny enough. Because tight ends in our league are very, very, undervalued because people are just I can get a receiver, which, fair, receivers have more upside. But why I say it worked out with you for Kelce paying 24 is because at 54 overall, you only paid $8 for Sam Laporta. So, and Laporta, funny enough, was the best fantasy tight end last year, ahead of Kelce. And Mac will tell you, he helped him win a championship. So, Laporta had a historic season. He had 86 receptions, 889 yards. But what really broke out for him was the 10 touchdowns, okay? The touchdowns are really what made Laporta big. And he was top 5 in routes, targets, receptions, receiving yards, touchdowns, and end zone targets for a tight end. So the 10 touchdowns with the 889 yards would be top 15 receiver-ish, top 10 almost. So Laporta at $8 is a bargain. Kelce at 24 is an overpay. But if we split the difference and say they're both 16, then that's right around where they're both probably what they're worth, because they're very, very close in value. Last year, Kelce was the number 3 fantasy tight end. Laporta was number 1. So you're paying for 2 top 3 tight ends. I don't love that, I will mention, because you're betting on touchdowns now at tight end. I'd rather have receivers for the yards, but I guess you're getting the yards of Michael Pittman Jr. and not getting the touchdowns. Anyway, among the 3 picks of Michael Pittman Jr., Travis Kelce, and Sam Laporta, Laporta's the best pick by far, because Laporta's a bargain, and he's a big, important piece of that offense. He's probably the second option, maybe the third option, depending on how you feel about Jahmyr Gibbs, but behind Amon-Ra St. Brown. And Jared Goff likes to target tight ends, so I'm thinking around, again, 85 receptions around there, probably another 850 yards. Might have some touchdown regression, though. I don't, 10's a lot. We'll say, for the sake of argument, we'll say 8. But I think Laporta is on the come up, while Kelce is on the come down, because Kelce is 36 now. Laporta's 23, so Laporta's young, very young. And Kelce's, getting towards the later half of his career, towards the end of his career, frankly. I mean, his brother just retired. So, between the two of them, though, it works out. I like Laporta quite a bit. 58 overall, so 4 picks later, we got DeAndre Swift for $10. I like to say, any running back with a pulse, $10 or more, doesn't matter. Go get him. So, funny enough, you had DeAndre Swift last year when he was on Philadelphia. His season was all right. He was a good player. I think he was the 23rd best fantasy running back. Problem was he didn't really get any touchdowns. He got over 1,000 yards rushing, funny enough. I didn't even know that till doing this. But I think he only got 6 touchdowns, even though he got over 1,200 yards. So, he went to the Eagles. He was 12th in carries. He was outside the top 20 in targets for receiving. He's only 25. And the problem was he didn't see a whole lot of goal line touches because Jalen Hurts, of course. And he only averaged 12.5 fantasy points a game, which sounds good. That was actually the lowest of his career. Chicago's probably a lower volume offense, but they paid Swift to be the guy. I don't know how much of the guy he's going to be. I mean, Khalil Herbert, I like a lot. I think Khalil Herbert is good enough to start in his own backfield. Also, Roschon Johnson is very good, too. I'm surprised we brought in Swift because I thought Herbert and Roschon could do this by themselves, but I digress. I think he'll still get 200 carries. I think he'll be ballpark around 900 rushing yards. I think we'll get more receiving, so maybe 40 receptions and 300 yards receiving, and around 6 or 7 touchdowns, which makes him usable. It makes him a top 25 running back again, so he's a starter. But very unexciting. Not a whole lot of upside, but 10 bucks. You can't beat that. You're just hoping to use the cost savings to do something else on your roster. But we like Swift. He's a very good player. For what he is, he has no vision, but man, is he fast. So 65 overall. Joe Burrow, $11. Okay. So Burrow had a very rough season last year. I think it was week 11 against Baltimore. He hurt his wrist, and he had the first wrist reconstruction for a quarterback ever. Most of the time, that particular injury has happened to offensive linemen, not quarterbacks. So last year was very injury plagued. He came into the season with a calf injury, and he wasn't really right until the bye week, which was week 7. He still has Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. They drafted Jermaine Burton, who's on Patrick's team, because Tyler Boyd went to Tennessee. I think Burrow is, if healthy, is a top 5 fantasy quarterback, despite being mostly a passer, because the Bengals are so damn pass heavy. I think he'll pass if Burrow is healthy. I mean, he's missed a lot of games in 2 particular seasons, but the other 2 particular seasons he was very, very good. He went to a Super Bowl, which is very difficult on the Bengals because they're so damn cheap. So I think he'll get his 4,000 yards. I think he'll get his 30 touchdowns. I think he'll probably throw 11 interceptions. And I think he might run the ball a little bit and maybe get 150 yards, maybe a handful, maybe a couple touchdowns. So, I mean, they call him Joe Cool. He is incredibly, incredibly accurate. He has probably some of the best anticipation of any quarterback. He's just able to figure out when a wide receiver is going to get an open window and just kind of throw the ball up before you even see it. It's genuinely difficult to see passing windows. You got to anticipate the window before throwing it, and that's what college guys struggle with when they go to the NFL. Burrow's one of the best at it. If he stays healthy, it's a quality choice. If he doesn't, not so great. $11, not that bad. I mean, Mahomes went for 18, Josh Allen went for 15. I'd rather have that. But at the same time, what was it? Jalen Hurts, I believe, went for 22. So we usually undervalue quarterbacks. Burrow's better than this. Most of the quarterbacks that went for their prices are better than what they were. I think $11 on him isn't bad. I don't mind it at all. Yeah, he's just got to stay healthy, man. I mean, Sarah will tell you that's what really depends on the Bengals season, if they can protect Joe Burrow. And also, I really wonder why they struggle so much protecting him. They keep throwing draft resources and signing people in free agency, and it just doesn't, they don't mesh. I couldn't tell you why. I'd need to go to the practices. I'd need to watch what's going on, but they just don't, it doesn't work. For the amount of resources they're throwing at the offensive line, they ought to have an elite offensive line, and it's not. So, I mean, this was mentioned in Warren Sharp's book. I mean, they should be elite. They should be a top 5 offensive line, just based purely on talent. And yet they're bottom 10 in pass win rate, their ability to hold off the pass rush. And it's a baffling thing that the Bengals are still bad at blocking when they're using so many resources to get better, which tells me it's not the players, it's coaching. So that is a worrisome thing, but they ought to be better. And Joe Burrow ought to be clean and healthy the whole season, because it is crazy that they can't seem to figure this out. 79 overall, $20, Cooper Kupp. All right. So first, I will admit, you're one of 3 teams, myself included, to do kind of the double dipping. What I mean by double dipping is you take a running back on the team that you're building around, and you also take a pass catcher on that team that you're building around, and you lower your upside by having 2 players on the same team, because obviously, if the running back's scoring touchdowns, the tight end or wide receiver isn't scoring touchdowns, and statistically, it's not very good to double dip. So Robbie's one of the teams. He has Isaiah Pacheco and Rashee Rice. I am one of the teams. I have Derrick Henry and Mark Andrews, and you are one of the teams with Kyren Williams and Cooper Kupp. So don't love that for me. Don't love that for Robbie. Don't love that for you. if you're in a high-powered offense, it can work. I mean, if you had freaking Kyron Williams and Puka Nacua last year, then that would have been like, great. But that's rare. Most of the time, it just lowers your upside, and that's why I strongly encourage not to do it. Like, that was a big bugaboo for Stefan last year, was he did it twice. And as good as his running backs were, Travis Etienne, Breece Hall, he could not get receiver right at all. And it basically destroyed his season. So, be careful. Anyway, last year for Kupp wasn't great. On the plus side, he had 400-yard games, and he had 5 outings of 15 or more fantasy points. On the minus, he missed the first 4 weeks of the season. He missed the last week of the season. He's missed 13 games the last 2 years since his triple crown, like most receiving touchdowns, most receiving yards, most receptions a year with the Rams 3 years ago. The other thing is Puka Nacua's emergence cut into Cooper Kupp and his play. Like, everyone told me while I had Puka Nacua and Kupp was coming back, it's like, oh no, Kupp's going to take all this away, and what's going to happen to Puka? Yeah, no, I watched the games, guys. Like, I'm going to be honest. Puka today, right now, is better than Cooper Kupp. Like, that's not a fade, that's not shade, that's truth. Puka is... If I think Kupp's a better route runner, the thing that works in Puka's favor, he's just simply more explosive. Probably helps that he's younger and his hamstrings aren't, giving him issues. So, yeah, Puka has become Matthew Stafford's favorite high-value target. And while what works for Kupp is he's probably still the red zone guy, less so than Puka, Kupp is a good player. I think he's probably like a wide receiver 2, a low-end wide receiver 2, so he's on the lesser end of basically what Michael Pittman Jr. is. The worry is, are his hamstrings good? Will he make it through a season? He hasn't done it in 2 years now. We're going to year 3 of him being injury-riddled, and now he has more competition for targets. I still think Kupp is an incredible player. I still think he might be a Hall of Fame player, to be honest with you. I still think he'll get his 1,000 yards. I still think he'll get, 6 touchdowns, maybe 80 receptions. So very Mike Evans-esque. A little bit less than Mike Evans, just because Puka's going to overshadow him. They will draw up plays for Cooper Kupp, but they will draw up plays for Puka Nacua. This is not Kyron Williams' offense. This is not Cooper Kupp's offense. This is not Matthew Stafford's offense. This is Puka Nacua's offense now. And the sooner people realize that with McVay, the easier it will be to value these players. So, yeah, that's why I really want to get Puka Nacua again, but AutoDraft said no. I like Kupp. I think there's upside here. I think he's a really good player. I think he might be a Hall of Famer. I feel like he's on the back end of his career. I'm concerned about his injuries, possibly compromising him. But we're going into the season healthy. He has good chemistry with Stafford, and he's still probably the red zone guy. So there is definitely value there. But the days of him being Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson kind of seasons, I think those are gone because it's Puka time. It's just, I like Kupp. I would want him on my team, but I also see the writing on the wall. Still, not a bad amount of money. I'll mention this. I don't mention defensive players usually, but I'll mention this. First, you spent $8 on TJ Watt. That's a lot. I actually liked Max Crosby on the Raiders more. I thought he would be a better value, but I drafted TJ Watt last year. He was great for me. I think he's a possible Hall of Fame player. I'm surprised he didn't win Defensive Player of the Year. Sincerely, I thought he was better. He had a better season than Myles Garrett. Go look it up. Don't believe me? Go look it up. He should have won Defensive Player of the Year. But $8 is a lot for a defensive player. And I bring that up because Blake Corum, who was the handcuff for Kyron Williams, only went for $6. You could have used that. The other reason why I bring this up is because you're currently starting Minka Fitzpatrick, who is a safety, but you're also starting Jesse Bates, who is also a safety. For my money, I think Jesse Bates is the best safety in football. And he was terrific last year for Atlanta. I don't really know why you're starting Minka Fitzpatrick, especially because you later drafted Kaiser White, who was excellent last year until he got hurt. But, I mean, I had him on my team. I would know. His first 11 games, he was like the number 3 linebacker in football in tackles. Anyway, he's going to get more tackles and probably get more passes defended than Minka Fitzpatrick. I don't really understand why you're starting Minka Fitzpatrick, especially when you can just start Kaiser White over him. I don't even know why Minka Fitzpatrick's on your team, because if you're going to start, you should start Kaiser White, who's a linebacker, over him, and then you should definitely start Jesse Bates over him, so then he has no place to start, so why would you keep an extra defensive player? Just food for thought, but I just don't, that doesn't really make sense. It's still going on today, it doesn't make sense. So, don't get it, don't agree with it, not sure why. 121, $1, Khalil Herbert. Okay, so we did get DeAndre Swift's handcuff and Khalil Herbert. I mean, last year he was in like the 3-headed, dreaded committee with D'Onta Foreman and Roschon Johnson. I mean, at least D'Onta Foreman's now in Cleveland, but now they've brought in DeAndre Swift. So, I mean, Herbert looked great when he actually got the ball, like, towards the end of the season. Like, I think each time he got over 15 touches in a game, he had over 15 fantasy points. The problem is that only happened 3 times. And I think he's a really good handcuff. Frankly, I think he's good enough to be a starting running back on his own somewhere. The problem is, again, he's probably sitting behind Swift, but, I mean, for my money, I think he's a better rusher than Swift, so it's just a better pass catcher. For now, we'll say like 600 yards, maybe 3 touchdowns, and then 100 yards receiving, which is very similar to what he did last year. But if something were to happen to Swift, Herbert's got to be the guy. Like, I'm tired of waiting. They ought to just commit to him. He's good enough to start. He's good enough to play. He's good enough to be their guy. I don't know why they don't trust him. I trust him. I think he ought to be their guy. $1.35, $1 Tua Tagovailoa. So, Tua had a very good season last year, Patrick will tell you. Helped him get to the playoffs. Threw for over 4,500 yards, 29 touchdowns, didn't run all that much. He doesn't run very much at all anymore because that hip injury his junior year at Alabama has really affected him. He doesn't have the wheels anymore. He's been very good the last couple of years. He's gotten the Dolphins to the playoffs with very explosive offenses, and then they've immediately lost in the wild card round. Having that incredible run game with Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane, and now Jalen Wright has really helped him. Having Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle has really helped him. I'm not too trusting in it because last year was very, very big for him. I mean, it was the Tyreek Hill show. Tyreek Hill was going for 2,000 yards, and then, he couldn't keep up that pace, but goodness me, he was incredible. But at the same time, I'm kind of just like, I don't know why you need a backup quarterback. And also, why do we need a backup? Why is Tua the backup quarterback we would pick? There are better backup quarterbacks. I mean, right now you can pick up Baker Mayfield. I don't love Baker Mayfield. He was a top 10 fantasy quarterback. Tua's like, he was the number 11 fantasy quarterback last year. So Tua's a lot like, almost like a worse version of Dak Prescott to me. Like, maybe, I guess, in real life in NFL, he's like a smaller version. But for fantasy purposes, like, Dak at least used to run, and then he had his knee injury, and I guess he feeds CeeDee Lamb. All right, so we won't say worse, but he's relatively similar. And I just don't, I'd rather have a running quarterback or someone with some upside, but realistically, I'd rather just have a running back on my bench. Don't know why we're carrying extra defensive player, don't know why Minka Fitzpatrick's on the team, don't know why backup quarterback and Tua's on the team. I would just cut them and get some running backs, because you should always be taking chances at running backs, especially towards the beginning of the year. You, of all people, ought to know that because that's what happened with Kyren Williams last year. So we're going to get more into that later. $149 Kenneth Gainwell. So, I mean, Gainwell hasn't done a whole lot. To be honest, I think I'm not really sure why Gainwell's on your team. Especially because I don't even think he's the handcuff to Saquon Barkley. I think secretly Will Shipley is the handcuff to Saquon Barkley because that's why they drafted him, and he's looked well. That being said, if something were to happen to Barkley and Gainwell was in a timeshare with Shipley, he'd do well. I mean, he's done basically he's averaged 300 yards a season and 30 receptions a season for 3 years now, so he's pretty consistent. He's relevant when someone ahead of him gets hurt, but not very relevant until then. But Barkley has a history of getting hurt. I don't know. I'd rather have Shipley than Gainwell, to be honest with you. $163 Jake Ferguson. Okay, I like Ferguson. So we take another tight end. He was a top 10 fantasy tight end last year. He really broke out now that Dalton Schultz is in Houston. There were days when Ferguson was having, like, whenever basically he scored a touchdown, he was great. He was, like, at the top 20 wide receiver. But you basically need him to get the touchdowns because he's only getting 5 or 6 receptions a game mostly. I think he's the number 2 in Dallas behind CeeDee Lamb, but he doesn't have a lot of yard after catch ability. It's really about the touchdowns. But I don't think that's a bad bet, especially for $1. I like Ferguson. So we'll say like another 750 yards. We'll say maybe 6 or 7 touchdowns. And those weeks he scores those touchdowns, those are weeks when he's like a top 20 receiver. And we like that. Last pick he took Marshawn Lloyd, who I liked. But then we've since cut him, and we picked up Ronnie Rivers. So I guess we'll talk about Rivers. I think Rivers is the number 3 back in for the Rams. So he's like, if something happened to Kyren Williams, Blake Corum would be the guy, and I think Rivers would kind of be the backup. But I don't know how much fantasy value that has, to be honest with you. I don't know. He's a back-end roster guy if you want to protect your investment, I guess, with Kyren. Rivers might have a role if Kyren gets hurt. So you might be like watching this and seem like, wow, that's your number 1 team. You're kind of down on them. It seems like, no, I mean, I'm just being realistic. When I add it all up, the team has maybe a lower ceiling than some of the higher end teams, but I think this team is like got a higher floor. I mean, that's the easiest way to put it. Like consistently good draft. Like Kyren Williams is a good player. Michael Pittman Jr. is a good player. Travis Kelce, good player. Sam Porter's a good player. DeAndre Swift's a good player. Joe Burrow's a good player. Cooper Kupp's a good player. T.J. Watt's a good player. Jesse Bates is a good player. Khalil Herbert's a good player. Jake Ferguson's a good player. Like, Tua is a good player. He was usable starting fantasy quarterback. I can't argue against that. Gainwell has been useful. Like, these are all good players. And that's how I feel about this team. I just think this team is my number 1 team going into the season. I think this team ought to be a playoff team. I don't know if it will be the number 1 team. It's not going to be one of those Eileen, like the season Eileen went to the championship game and she only lost 1 game the entire freaking regular season. I don't see this team as being dominant, but I see this team being very good. I would give them a B+ draft just because I think Leyland's floor is higher than most teams, but I would also really clean up the back end of the roster. I would get rid of Tua. I'd probably get rid of Gainwell. I'd definitely get rid of Minkah Fitzpatrick. I mean, I would just I would roll the dice on some, like, handcuff running backs that are out there. Dameon Pierce, Jamal Williams, Will Shipley, I think is if you really like Saquon Barkley's handcuff, Will Shipley's out there. I don't think any of Andre, Eileen, or Charlie have got any of their handcuff running backs. I'm sure you could find some of them on free agency, especially because we limit how many running backs every team could get. But for a team that stumbled into Kyren Williams last year on free agency, I'm genuinely surprised you're not trying to do the same thing. I don't really know why we've not maxed out our running backs and why we're keeping an extra defensive player and a backup quarterback, especially a backup quarterback in Tua that I don't have a whole lot of belief in. There's better backup quarterbacks, but I digress. Robbie likes his backup quarterbacks. I can't really argue with you. So this may not seem like a glowing review, but I still think you're my number one team just because I think your floor is higher. You're a lot safer to pick to get to the playoffs and do something and make noise. It might be difficult for you to win a title, but I mean, to be quite frank with you, if Kyren Williams has a Kyren Williams season, if Joe Burrow and Cooper Kupp are healthy, this team is probably going to be a semifinalist at the very least. That's really all you need. That's the only real questions I have. Because everybody else, Pittman Jr., I don't love him. The upside's not great. He's a good player. He's a solid player. He will stay healthy. He will produce. He will get his numbers. Same thing with Kelsey. Same thing with Laporta. Same thing with Swift. If Burrow goes down and Tua's not your guy, I'm sure you can find a quarterback, so I'm not really worried about that. And then Kyren, I really wish you had gotten Blake Corum. I am surprised you didn't make that a point to get Blake Corum, but Kyren is a very good player in his own right. He's not as efficient as like Christian McCaffrey or Bijan Robinson or Breece Hall, but he is a good player. He's a very good player in basically the perfect offense for him. And if he does his thing and he's healthy the whole season, mind you, then he's gonna take you to the fantasy playoffs by himself. You don't even have to have anything else added on top of that. So I like this team a lot. I wish I had a draft like this. You're going places, Leyland. You're in one season. You've probably gotten more out of it than most of the teams who've been here for a while. Like we talk about all the girls, like Sarah and Lauren and Eileen and Charlie. And you're just having better drafts than all of them, and it's not close. So good job on you. Yeah, just keep doing what you're doing, man. But yeah, overall, I'm going to give this team a B+. Nah, I guess we can get A-. We'll give our only A of the year. So A-, number one team. Team's just really high floor, really good team, very solid draft. I think you might have to make one or two, maybe one big move to win a title, but you are closer than every other team in the league, and that's a good starting place. You have a very solid foundation, and you can definitely build up. And instead of just building anything, you can build a tower. So good job, Leyland. You just keep doing what you're doing, man.